Hello, I am Anawultus, and today I'm going to be talking about my recent hurricane experience and what happened, and also explaining why I haven't been uploading in the past few days. As some of you may know, recently there have been some storms from uh, the hurricane forming region that have been coming up and hitting the United States. There was one hitting Texas, but more recently there was one that hit Florida. And as many of you may know, I live in Central Florida, so that, of course, was a little bit important for me to deal with. So anyway, prepared for the hurricane, put everything that was outside that that wasn't nailed down. I needed to put it in safe locations, make sure that everything was fine, and didn't need to board the windows because I was pretty far inland. So by the time the hurricane reaches that far, it generally loses a lot of power. Now that being said, other people around me did board windows, so I guess there's a concern, but an important thing that a lot of people miss is that it's important to have an airflow in a hurricane through the building, because otherwise it can create a pressure differential between the inside of a building and the air that's moving around outside, and that can damage the building in a catastrophic manner. So it's important to allow the air pressure to balance out. Also, in the Florida heat, it's also important to make sure that you have at least a breeze going, especially if the power's out, so that you don't overheat or have any problems. I didn't have a generator, and the power went out on the day the hurricane hit, and the power was off for 2 whole days and another half a day after that. So that was 4 days where more or less didn't have any power, but of course had lamps that ran on batteries. Also had candles, but it depending on what type of lamp you use, it's probably better to use a lamp because candles produce heat, and in Florida, when it's hot, you don't really want to waste time on having a lot of heat. So anyway, you might be wondering, why do I sound a little bit lispier than normal? The reason for that is because I'm recovering from an ear, throat, and mouth infection that I happened to get at the same time that the hurricane came. So at the time when it was the worst, I didn't have access to the doctor because, of course, was trapped inside the home because of the dangers outside. So anyway, there was a lot of rain, but I didn't have to worry about flooding or anything like that because I lived in a raised area, so there wasn't any real risk of that. And regarding water, I had a separate well, but it was an electric well, which meant that I had to have water ready ahead of time for the hurricane, so that I don't run out of water. Now, of course, it's not just drinking water. You need water for washing, and if you want to flush a toilet, you need to have water for that. And I've got a separate septic tank, so we're not on. My household is not on the main water grid, so that definitely is a good thing because it means that we don't have to deal with issues relating to sewage potentially coming up because of water levels or anything like that. So that was fine, and we had plenty of water. That was all right. Had plenty of food. In the end, we did have some spoilage, of course, because the power was off for so long, and if you have perishable foods, especially if you need something to be refrigerated or frozen. It's eventually going to go bad. And there was some stuff that went bad, but fortunately, a lot of the stuff was all right when the time came for everything, for all the power to come back on. So anyway, because the power was off, I of course didn't really want to waste my computer's battery because I like to leave my computer on. I always have a lot of different windows open, and it becomes a huge hassle to turn it off and on again. So I really don't do that unless it's really necessary. So I usually leave it on sleep. I know there's probably some tech guys out there that say, "Oh no, you shouldn't do that," and that's probably why my computer's slowly dying as time goes by. But everything ended up being all right. There seems to be a very large demand for petroleum, meats, milk, and such things right now because I guess everybody needed all that stuff for the storm and such things. And of course, the supply for it isn't necessarily coming in as fast as it usually would. But now that the storm has passed, some people might not know this, but in many areas in the United States, there's laws that are set up to prevent people from raising prices on essential products like water or petroleum or other essential products during an impending storm. So now that has passed, we're likely to see some rising prices for some things as the businesses that weren't able to raise their prices to counter the large demand need to adjust for that. So anyway, everything went fine. The power's back, internet's back. Saw some utility guys driving down the road. They were in a big convoy. Why'd I say convo? I don't even know what that is. What's a convo? That's probably a word that means something. But unfortunately, it is not within my vocabularies. Therefore, I cannot fathom its meaning. But anyway, there was a convoy of electric company vehicles moving around, and I looked at some maps afterward, looking at how big were the power outages, because I had a relative who went to the power company the day after the hurricane and asked, "Oh, how long do you think it'll be after the power comes back?" And the person said, "Oh, we have over 700 outages." And I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot of outages. And turns out throughout most areas of Florida, there were outages. And for those of you who do not know, Florida is around the size of Italy, for those of you who live in Europe. So that's a lot. That's a large area to have widespread outages on. Now, of course, in some areas, the outages weren't as complete as in others, but definitely there were a lot of outages. And there's still several recovery efforts going on. So I think prayer helps. That definitely helps. But anyway, on another note, I needed to relieve myself during the storm, and I'm thinking, well, I could pee in the toilet, but that would mean that would just be one step closer to needing to flush the toilet, which meant wasting a bucket load of water, and well, not necessarily wasting, because it is something that's necessary. You have to get rid of your waste somehow. It's called waste for a reason. There's a reason why people pay for others to take their trash away. But I decided, you know what? Nature calls, then why not answer nature? So I went outside and I took a piss in the hurricane. In fact, 3 times while it was coming. And you know what? I was fine. I went outside several times during the hurricane because you know what? I like the wind. The wind is very fun. I always thought that hurricanes are a great venue for some martial arts practice because it's always important for martial artists to practice in different environments in order to test your skills, test your might, and just see where you are. Of course, another thing that's important to say is that I was inland, which meant that the winds weren't as bad and there weren't as many problems. So, of course, if you're going out to do something in a storm, make sure that you're safe, especially if you live in Central Florida where there's a lot of lightning. It's they call it the Sunshine State, but it's got to be said that Central Florida receives a lot more lightning than many other areas in the United States. So it's always important to be very careful if you are testing the elements, so that the elements don't test you. Anyway, hopefully that was enlightening as to why there weren't many videos coming out recently. It's because I was without power and consequentially without internet and needed to do some recovery. And I was sick as well at the same time, as I said earlier, had an infection. So, but everything's fine now. So hopefully I'll get some videos on the go, and hopefully that will be enjoyable for everyone watching, or as you are probably doing right now, listening, since I'm probably not going to be doing anything interactive on the screen at the moment. Anyway, as to actual property damage, there wasn't much. Some branches got ripped off some trees, but those were trees that we wanted to eliminate anyway. That dead trees that had been diseased. And another wise word of advice: never have, if you're in an area that's prone to powerful windstorms, or just as a general rule, you shouldn't really have very tall trees next to your home, because if they fall onto your home, they can cause a lot of damage. So it's always good to have a little bit of clearance around your home. That really helps protect your home from potential damage. Just keep the trees at an arm's length, metaphorically, of course, because if that were literally true, then that would mean having a tree an arm's length away from your home, which is counter to the point that I'm making. So it's very important to look at the context, not only the context of the surrounding words, but also the cultural context in which words are said, because sometimes they may be misinterpreted to mean something very different and very inaccurate. And of course, you might be wondering, why am I even emphasizing something like this? Why would anyone misinterpret that? And the answer is, of course, why did I say why for that long? But that is not the answer. The actual answer is, putting stuff out on the internet, it reaches a lot of people. Some people may not be familiar with some common English idioms, and you know what? It may reach a future generation that has not been familiar with that saying. So it's important to occasionally explain something, so that if a future generation gets a hold of this generation's material, they don't sit around being confused and believing that people believed all sorts of weird things nowadays. But such as saying that an arm's length is a decent distance to build a tree. To build a tree? What am I talking about? What is this? This isn't Minecraft. To plant a tree away from your home. So, and I'm certain that my point gets proven quite a lot. My point about language, that is, if you look at some ancient texts and some interpretations of those ancient texts, and then you look at them and somehow something's off with the interpretation, and maybe you look at the text and it doesn't seem to make sense. It seems to be saying something really weird, even though in the context of it, it really shouldn't be saying anything really weird. It's maybe because you're not familiar with the cultural context in which that statement was said. So anyway, that was a little bit of a side lesson on cultural context. And, an example for today. Okay. So, the N-word, which I'm not going to say right now because I don't want to get ultra controversial like PewDiePie got recently when he used it. Because I know that even though I would say that it would be okay to use it contextually in a descriptive manner, in the sense that I'm describing which word I'm saying. But I'm not going to say the full word because I know that there's some people that take some serious issue if you use the full word. So anyway, the N-word is used culturally among certain groups, and they don't use it in a mean way. I'm talking about that specific cultural group. And now let's say you're someone who was always taught that it was a very bad word, and you never went around that cultural group. And then suddenly you walk up to them, and they use the N-word. And you're thinking, wow, how could you be so mean to people that are supposedly your friends? And there you go. That's a misunderstanding because of cultural context. So anyway, thank you all for listening or watching, depending on whether you decided to look at a still frame for this entire 17, going on to 18-minute length video. And I will be seeing you all next time on Awiltus over and out.